Добрий день.
Good morning. I want to thank everybody who joins us. Ukraine Media Center, Ukrinform continues its operation. My name is Olga Atamanova, and it's day 280 of the heroic resistance of the Ukrainian people. And right now, I want to introduce our next speaker. Joining us online is Liudmyla Fylypovych, religion scholar, the Doctor of Philosophy of Institute of Philosophy of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. Good morning, Miss Liudmyla. Good morning, Miss Liudmyla. I propose to start our conversation with the influence of the war on our religious map. What changes have happened? Thank you. This is a very serious question. We study it as the scholars now, but the usual order of things we are used to, for example, when we submitted reports on the number of religious organizations in Ukraine, it was already interrupted, and it will be interrupted due to the warfare and due to the fact that large territories are occupied. This is why we have to understand what changes will be happening in the religious life of our land. And let's remember that with the beginning of the Russian-Ukrainian war back in 2014, the religious landscape of Ukraine has changed. It was influenced by occupation of Crimea and parts of occupation of parts of Donetsk and Luhansk region. So the religious map of Ukraine was transformed pretty seriously, and the usual statistics of the religious network of Ukraine was being detailized gradually in relation of newly occupied and annexed territories. For the first time in 25 years of independence, we documented the substantial decrease in religious organizations and geography of their spreading for the first time in 25 years. First of all, it was about the Islamic organizations, mostly represented by Crimean Tatar Muslims, but the Orthodox Christians were changed as well. But the open aggression of Russia against Ukraine in February of 2022 resulted in losses of the adherents of Orthodox Church, in destruction of the temples, and we can talk about it in more detail. And first of all, I would like to emphasize that in the religious map of Ukraine of 2014, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church emerged, and starting from the Sobor of 2018 of the three branches of Ukrainian Church, the Ukrainian Autocephalic Church and Moscow Patriarchate and Kyiv Patriarchate, and the acquisition of Thomas from the Universal Church. This circumstance changed the disposition of the forces of Christian forces, not only in Ukraine but all over the world. The hegemony of Russian Patriarchate was undermined seriously, not only in Ukraine but throughout the world. The universal Christianity polarized very significantly. Some churches supported Constantinople and its right to provide the Thomas to Ukraine, and there were such who were standing for Moscow who still cannot accept that there is a 15th self-regulating church, the Ukrainian Church. And the situation is quite paradoxical. While those who were nobody, who were considered renegades, who didn't want to be talked to in Christian world, now they acquired canonical status thanks to the Thomas. And they're vis-a-vis the Moscow Patriarchate Church, they lost this canonical privilege because the self-proclaimed independence, not even self-regulation, is not recognized by anybody so far. Another important moment, the preface of Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate, we witnessed a plot there upon the advent of Onufry from Bukovina, who did not show any pro-Ukrainian views. He defined the denationalization processes in this church. Onufry was the one who did not accept the assessment of Holodomor, who said it was the punishment from the God. So he headed the charge of the Moscow Patriarchate, and he removed all the pro-Ukrainian activists from the church. Alexander Podrobinka, Georgy Kovalenko, and it's clear that many people from the church taking care of their church career, they acquired the status of non-Ukrainity. Onufry did not call Russia an aggressor, called for abstract peace, and he equalized Ukrainian fighters, Ukrainian military with the Moscow invaders. And the expressions of Ukrainian independence, the language independence, were represented as sin, and his position as to interconfessional relations, Onufry just incited inter-church antagonism. He does not want to accept the dialogue with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and just under the circumstances of war and accusations from his adherents, the church started proceeding to autonomization and partial independence of the Moscow Patriarchate. I won't stop at the cathedral resolutions as of May this year, but Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate did not support its pro-Ukrainian position. They did not answer the question who they are with, either with Kyiv or Moscow. So this church now is one of the most organized structures without any clear support for Ukraine, and trying to bring Ukraine back to the Orthodox community headed by the Moscow. And in current circumstances, this position is anti-Ukrainian, it's anti-national and anti-state. Many pro-Moscovian Orthodox structures still are active in Ukraine. And by the latest investigations of Security Service of Ukraine and what they found in the monasteries recently, it should be investigated in more detail, but it looks a lot like a high treason, and we'll see how the Security Service will proceed with the completion of their investigation to their logical end. The Ukrainian national communities are being proclaimed by the Moscow Patriarchate as the expressions of Satanism and fascism and Ukrainian nationalism. So this church is still planting the ideology of the Russian world, and we understand that there should be an end put to all of it. The emergence in the religious life in Ukraine of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church became a challenge for the Catholics. The Universal Patriarchate, which recognized the Ukrainian Church, they required the establishment of a new relations between the Greek Catholic Church, which is not yet done on the official level. We witness certain evolution in the Catholic community as to their attitude to Ukrainian Orthodox Church. So they treat it as the subject of inter-church relations. The war expedited those processes because the position of the Catholic Church somewhat coincides with the Ukrainian position and differs from the Vatican position, which is humanistic in its nature, or in part with attempts to justify the atrocities committed by the Russians in the Ukrainian lands. For example, the last letter from the Pope, you know, it is the step which follows the events. So Pope does not bring any prophet messages for Ukrainians. He just witnesses the events which already happened there. So we can say that the relations are pretty complicated. And fourth, not less important, that the Protestants, they take somewhat undefined position, so that they stand against the customs unity with Russia, but they still keep their contacts with Russia and their scholar centers, thus ignoring, under the conditions of the war, the pro-Ukrainian orientation taken by the majority of the religious organizations of Ukraine. So the Protestants pray for peace, but not for Ukraine's victory of the war. They thank God for the opportunity to live in the non-occupied territories. They ask for the protection of those living in the occupied territories, but they are convinced that that the war is a punishment for Ukrainians for not adhering to the God's commandments. And different Protestant organizations expressed this view, but you know, the war somewhat cleared their conscience, and they started demonstrating more sane pro-Ukrainian orientation. And I have to emphasize, for example, the evangelistic church, Baptists, and others. For example, recently there was an interesting document from the Adventists where they condemned the activities of Orekhovsky, who is the advisor to Putin. And you know how all the Russians support the aggression. I mean, 90% of them support the aggression of Russia in Ukraine. I would also like to mention that there's a noticeable change in attitude in Islamic structures which are located in the non-occupied territories of Ukraine. The Muslim communities position themselves in different ways. For example, the Mufti Ahmed community does not express any strict condemnation of Russian aggression, and they support the relations with the Kadyrov Chechens. Dumu Uma now expresses its pro-Ukrainian support. Said Ismailov was in Ukrainian Maidan, and he headed that organization, and he is now in the ranks of the armed forces of Ukraine as a paramedic, bringing out the wounded ones, the wounded soldiers from the front lines, and he recommended to vote a new mufti, Sheikh Murat Suleimanov from Lviv and Galiciana. He's one of the brightest religious leaders of Islamic communities in Ukraine. The activities of the spiritual center of the Muslims in Donbass is still unclear since they're occupied territories. What about the Jewish organizations? Not all of them clearly verbalized their position against the war. The pro-Ukrainian support was expressed by Alexander Dukhovny, and the head rabbi of Ukraine, who has the Ukrainian Jewish communities, Moshe Asman, called for Israeli government for multiple times for the support of Ukraine against Russian aggression. The Congress of Jews of Ukraine, until recently headed by Vadim Rabinovich, the opposition deputy, their position is still unclear. So we can summarize that the changes in the religious map of Ukraine starting from 2014, these changes they are still in progress. It's clear that we will capture back all the temporarily occupied territories, but you understand that the resumption of religious life over there will be very, very difficult because the temples are destroyed, many people left. I already mentioned that the priests left, and the Ukrainian society is now in expectation that the government will express its position in relation to those changes. It may forecast and make known to their citizens that there will be steps for the resumption of religious life, rebuilding of temples, and compensation of losses inflicted on the religious organizations. And I think that this, in response to your question, I think my answer was complete, and if there are any more questions, I am ready to answer them. Ms. Liudmyla, coming back to Ukrainian Church, Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate, we have a situation where there is an enclave of Russian propaganda working in the middle of our country. And based on those searches by the security service of Ukraine, they commit treason, the high treason. So we're talking about the actual security of our country, national security of our country. How do we go through this situation? Does our government have any levers of influence on this situation, and what can be the destiny of the churches of Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine? It's a complicated question because the law in force in our country, it does not envisage any restriction of the activities of religious organizations, save for two cases. First of all, it's the dissolution of the organization when they, for example, gather a cathedral and they adopt a resolution to terminate their activity, but you understand that it will be hard to expect such a resolution from Ukrainian Church of Moscow Patriarchate. Maybe some of their branches, or upon the court award, we will have to gather a lot of evidences. The prosecutor will have to file the claim. It may be not only the prosecutor, but civil organization or just an individual. There should be a court proceedings established, but let's ask ourselves, do we have enough honest courts, fair judges, and active advocates, active barristers? Because we understand that church with such an influence may find enough lawyers to protect themselves. I think that currently we have enough evidences to bring to liability those people who discredit the church, who create the negative moods, negative tunes in the society, who put the church outside the law, beyond the law, that the roots, that it doesn't have any roots in Ukraine and it's some celestial structure. We have to remind all the adherents of the church and the heads of this church that they are citizens of Ukraine and they are just as responsible for what's going on in the country as everyone else in the country. If they commit a crime, if they commit high treason, if they spread some enemy ideology, or they influence the health of people, it all falls under the terms of the law and it should be prosecuted. Those people should be prosecuted, they should be punished, and if we're not satisfied with the law in force, the new laws should be adopted. But the question is if they are being complied with. The discipline of compliance with the law in Ukraine is very, very low. I agree with you that really we have questions to the work of our courts and law enforcement agencies, but we're talking about the huge demand from the society. For example, the last case in Lavra in terms of culture, heritage, the society is being agitated by the fact that crimes against the states are being committed there. What do you think? Can Lavra transfer to Ukrainian Orthodox Church on, say, on legal grounds? Do we have any reasons to believe so? All the churches are national heritage sites, they don't belong to the church, but they belong to Ukrainian people, and the right to occupy those facilities, those premises, to stay in Lavra, the permit was adopted by the Parliament of Ukraine. They provided this right to Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate on legal grounds. And one of the legal ways to do what you mentioned will be the termination of the agreements already entered into and entering into new agreements with those subjects, with those whom the government will consider safe for Ukraine. We understand that nobody will force people, the monks out of Lavra using weapons or clubs, but those investigations, the searches happening now are the first warning for Kyiv Patriarchate Lavra and for the church. They indicate the discontent of Ukrainian society with the strategy adopted by this church. So there are legal ways, but we have to have responsible people who will want to accomplish this mission, and we understand that the church has people who trust in God fairly and honestly. They love Ukraine, and the statements made by the priests of the church, voiced by Andriy Pinchuk, those statements were signed by more than 500 priests. So we can say that there are some sane forces who remain in this force. They understand the necessity of contextualization of religious life in the current life conditions of Ukraine. So they have to think, should they keep the literature in their religious stores, on their shelves, the literature which is alien to Ukrainian conscience, Ukrainian traditions, which during the last 350 years was neglected. The expansion of Russian world in Ukraine, it did not start yesterday. So starting from those times where the books printed in Kyiv were burned, when the Kyivites were rebaptized by Moscow Patriarchate Church, and Kyiv moods were retuned into Moscow Patriarchate tune, and it was all imposed. And now what we're having is the majority of adherents of this church. They don't fully understand the circumstances they find themselves in. They don't realize themselves as the part of Ukrainian state or as the Ukrainian nation, Ukrainian world and Ukrainian tradition. And now the situation and the question is sharp. We either defend it, or we rebuild the Ukrainian world and fulfill this mission, or we become a part of Kremlin. And another question discussed in the society, we know that very soon the Christian world will celebrate Christmas. So what are the prospects of changing the dates of celebration of Christmas from 7th of January to 25th of December? Now this question became quite political, because celebration of Christmas on the 7th of January together with the Moscow Patriarchate Church, it looks now as a treason, as a high treason. But generally the celebration on the 25th of December, this issue was raised long time ago, and by this resolution of Ukrainian Orthodox Church Synod, well, it was not a resolution but a recommendation. If the adherents of the church are ready to celebrate it on 25th of December, they can implement this tradition in the life of their community. And you know, if the community votes, the priest has to comply with the resolution of its community. I will tell you for sure that Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate will not switch to celebration on the 25th of December. But what's surprising in this situation is that Peter I, back in 1710, he switched to Moscovia to Gregorian. He said that we will have the year 1700, but in Julian calendar the date remained the same. So no matter how long is the difference between these two calendars, but I think that we should bring we should synchronize our church calendar and the regular calendar. We will have to rewrite our church calendar. The dates would change. So imagine, for example, that the Church of Christ born celebrated Christmas on the 7th of January, and now they will switch to 25th of December. But if we take it reasonably, just as Pope Gregory V implemented his calendar, he decided that it will be not like 15th but 5th of October. So no, it didn't hurt anybody, but there is it's just a question of determination, of resolution. I want to thank you for this very deep conversation. I will remind you, joining us was Liudmyla Fylypovych, religious scholar, doctor of philosophy. Our next briefing is at 12 o'clock. Joining us will be Vitaly Kim, head of Mykolaiv